is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Haunting of Bly Manor, Season 1, Episode 6, The Jolly Corner. In this episode, Henry Wingrave is haunted by what feels like a manifestation of himself created by his own brother's rage. It's honestly intriguing. And also, what the fuck is going on with Miss Jessel and Flora? Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you so much to Ashleigh for commissioning this episode and then bearing with me when I had to reschedule. I'm really lucky in that we have power here in Texas, and we have had internet for like 2 days now, and I am pretty confident that it's going to stay. I wasn't sure. But yeah, things happened and I had to reschedule, and it just wound up being kind of my luck in a way that Jamie wasn't able to record with me this week, so I had an easy slot to get all of this done before tomorrow when a bunch of follow-up episodes are going to be happening. And this episode was really, really, really wild. The last episode was probably my favorite in terms of the overall show, because I mean, everything that's going on with Hannah Gross is fascinating, and finding out this big twist, even if I did suspect, it doesn't change how interesting that is. But this episode was wholly unexpected in that what was going on with Hannah, it was very clear there was something, right? I think we all knew something's up with this lady, and we're about to find out that there's like a weird thing, a weird story, something. But Henry, it didn't really necessarily feel like there was going to be a big explanation. I had sort of theorized at one point, maybe it's just that he doesn't want to come back because he feels like afraid of Bly Manor after having had some terrible things happen there as a kid. Like maybe he went through something sort of similar to what Miles and Flora have gone through. And he just has bad memories of the place and doesn't want to return. And I mean, that still could be a piece of the puzzle. But it doesn't really feel that way. Like when he's describing the house to Danny, and he calls it a great good place, there is a sense of sincerity, in my opinion, to that statement. It feels like he really likes the place, that he really, there's a longing almost. It didn't feel like the kind of way that you would talk about somewhere you're afraid to return to. So I wasn't really sure what to make of that. And then, if there were something frightening going on, his choice to completely stay away when these children are at risk, that implies that he's either a really bad person, like much worse than I felt like he came across as, which is certainly, I'm, open to that. But it would sort of feel like he was like ready to sacrifice his niece and nephew in a way, or what we find out is his daughter and nephew. And it just felt like that just was a little bit, that was a bridge too far, I would be willing to think that of a much worse person. But he didn't give off the vibe of somebody who's willing to see children suffer and die because he doesn't want to deal with his own baggage. I mean, it turns out that is kind of what he's doing. But there is a scene that I wonder if it doesn't sort of explain things. So, okay, I'm getting ahead of myself, as I am wont to do. So, we start off the episode with the very first introduction of his, what has been called in the subtitles, his alter ego. it's really interesting because the way that when we see like how his alter ego and he first, quote, met, there's a real sense to this ego manifesting as a genuine, actual being. As this is not his imagination. This is something that has appeared. Because it like helps him to his feet. You know, it's behaving in a way that feels real. But I don't actually think it is real. It's obviously, it's created via a combination of what his brother said to him and his own guilt. I'm going to jump ahead to the moment that his brother like tells him that he knows, because it's quite a scene. So he tells him basically, I don't care, you know, what anybody says. Flora's my daughter in every way that counts. And there's this wonderful moment where he realizes that his brother was not aware that Flora was his kid. And there's like a sort of satisfaction there to him because he's like, you know, I'm sure there's just a sense of, wow, you played me for a fool for this long. But she was also keeping something from you. And not it's not just one of us that's the idiot here. And I did sort of appreciate the pettiness of that because I would fucking feel that as well. And he says, I've been thinking about what the right word must be, and I keep getting stuck on banished. It's close. It has teeth, but not nearly enough. It'll do for now. You're banished, little brother. You are banished from my house. You're banished from my wife, my children. Banished. You don't have a brother anymore, or a niece, or a nephew. You have nobody but yourself. And yourself, Henry, your real self, is a evil shit. A grotesque little demon. He says, I pity you because you have to live with him. And then he calls him like a grinning little goblin or something like that. You have to live with yourself. He's a shit grinning fucking monster, isn't he? And that is basically what winds up manifesting is this exact version of himself that his brother threw at him. It's fascinating because it could just be a psychological thing. And I think that is meant to be what it is. But it feels like his brother called into being this thing. And it feels like his brother's banishment is like a magic spell that just locked into place when he said these words, and that Henry cannot return to Bly Manor. We find out at the end of this episode, he says, like, I have a terrible feeling. I haven't had this feeling in a long time. I'm going back there and I'm going to, figure out what's going on. So it doesn't sound like there's actually anything physically keeping him from going to see them. But there is definitely a sense to me that banishment for him, it was like his penance. As if his brother telling him all of this, and then how he goes off and dies. He felt like the least he could do was honor his brother's wishes, considering the way that he completely fucked up as a human being. And I can really understand that, as much as it feels irrational in its way. There is a big part of me that's like, ooh, you know what? That does kind of work, though. I see why that felt like the thing to do. It was the wrong choice, but you are living with a guilt of feeling almost like you sent both of these people you loved to their deaths, which he didn't, obviously. They made the choice to go on this trip to sort of try and save their relationship, which, by the way, guys, I don't know if you've ever been through something like that, but I went on a short trip with my ex-husband in the effort to save our relationship, and it was the worst thing in the whole world. I have no doubt that for some couples, this method actually does work. It did not work for us, and it was excruciating, and I was so depressed, and it just really sort of underlined that things were over rather than otherwise, you know? It was rough. So this whole, like, I just really feel for him, because it's not like he was, and listen, I'm going to be showing my personal biases here. There is an amazing Reductress headline that those of you who don't know what Reductress is, look it up. It's the best. But they have a headline that says, cheating is wrong unless I'm doing it, and then people are only human. Everyone makes mistakes. And this is like really how a lot of us behave most of the time, right? We like to draw a firm line in the sand about right and wrong, but when it comes to our situations, it's all gray all of a sudden, you know? That said, Henry and what is his wife's name? I keep wanting to say Charlotte, then I'm saying Flora. I don't know where I'm getting either of those names. No, Flora's little girl, Fiona. That's what I'm thinking. What's her name, guys? They actually love each other. So, in light of that, I am more tempted to be like, oh, this just is a shitty situation. Oh, her name is Charlotte. Oh, thanks, Ashleigh. That's funny. I accidentally remembered. I just don't really, it's not like they were just messing, like there's the story later that Jamie tells about her mother and her mother cheating on her father. And there's a real sense of like her mother was just too young to handle the responsibility of being a parent. And it doesn't feel like this is just a dalliance for the funsies, although I'm sure it was. It really does feel like she was in love with both of them and she didn't really know what to do. And I do have some sympathy for that. And I have some sympathy for him being in love with somebody who is married to his brother. Like, that is just such a shitty situation. I don't have siblings, and I don't really feel like I've ever fallen for somebody who was already with another person in my life. I've gotten really lucky that way. So it hasn't been an experience that I can relate to. I can only imagine. And that must be like the most painful shit. So while he did the wrong thing, obviously, in deciding to carry on this like long-lasting affair, bad call, my dude. I also understand like the hopelessness and the feeling of just like, well, what am I going to do? Like, I'm not going to go out and find another woman that I'm in love with like this person. It's just, all of this love is just a mess, y'all. And we really want to be able to like fit it into these tidy, neat little boxes because it makes us feel better and it's just like easy, but it just doesn't actually fit there. And I have a feeling like that she did love both of them. It wasn't that she was in love with his brother, but not him. Dominic. Thank you, Ashleigh. Yeah, it wasn't like she was in love with Henry, but not Dominic. I really do feel like she was in love with both of them, but Dominic was away all the time. And I think a lot of people underestimate the effect of a spouse being gone. And personally, that was a major factor in my split with Brendan. He was on the road for work constantly. And he rarely asked for time off. And it was really difficult to get him to commit to spending time with me. Even when he was home, he was working. And it just felt like I was alone. It really, like I was alone in the relationship. And whether that person is out working to basically support your family, you want that to matter more than it actually does when it comes right down to it. The fact is, you married somebody because you cared about them and you wanted to have a partnership, and now it feels like you're managing everything by yourself. And that's a really shitty place to be, especially when you have children. So what I'm saying here is just that I have sympathy for everybody in this situation because it just sucks. And this whole thing, it's really fascinating how much this series, and I'm sort of going to assume the original series, The Haunting of Hill House, probably has similar themes, because it's really a common thing that you play with the ideas of the past and memories and the interference of the past in the present when you're dealing with a ghost story. That's pretty much what ghosts are, right? Is ghosts are meant to sort of represent the past. And that can be in an incredibly literal way. It can be in a metaphorical way. You can be haunted in a multitude of senses. So it doesn't, like, it isn't surprising, I guess I should say, that they chose to go with this. But I really do enjoy the different ways that they're investigating memory. So we've got Hannah, and it's like she's stuck in a loop of memories because she's already dead. And that's all she is memory. Then we've got Flora, who is apparently being tucked away into her memories while she is occupied by Miss Jessel, I believe is what's going on. And we've got Henry, who it's like a memory has sort of created this ghost, like a mental ghost. We also have this going on with, this is pretty much what it seems like was going on with Danny as well. It's guilt. Danny, however, this episode, no sightings of the man in glasses, which I have to assume is purposeful. And that's very encouraging. It feels like she has somehow passed through a gauntlet there and come out on the other side. But yeah, it's just really interesting to see the way that they are handling the concept of ghosts and memories and haunting. What does that mean? You know? So there's a series of scenes where, like, the first scene, he is getting informed by his secretary that the au pair has called again. There are some things that she's concerned about, not alarming, but some things that you may want to hear about. And he just says, no need, I'm just glad the children are well. And it becomes clearer over time that she really does not approve of the way he's handling everything. Initially, she just bears with him. And when he says that he doesn't want to talk to the au pair, she's like, okay, I think that's the wrong call, but okay. And as time goes on, she grows more and more obviously impatient with him and is more willing to bend the rules about what he told her, because it's clear that she feels the urgency in these phone calls and she thinks that he really needs to be handling them differently. And I really love how that slowly escalates, because it feels like it's the same as his guilt escalating. And that's what happens when you're coping with something like this. It's like you really become super conscious of everybody around you judging you as well. And that, I think this is really happening. But one could interpret it as, him becoming a little bit more paranoid as time goes on, as he's realizing that he really has just abdicated all responsibility, And so, yeah, this is the first time that we see the figure standing outside, then a little bit later in the office, and finally we have the moment where they're, like, sharing a drink, and we see that it is a being that looks exactly like him, that is grinning at him in this way that is so fucking unsettling. There is nothing quite like bad guys who smile. And I don't mean like the Joker. The Joker smiling, that feels like that's a grimace, first of all, obviously. It also feels like a put-on. But bad guys who smile because they're genuinely having a great time, that is, I don't want any part of that. I don't want any part of that. I don't want anybody I love anywhere near that. And this guy is just looking at him like every bit of pain this man is suffering is ambrosia to him. This is just the best time. He is loving it. And it's awful. Oh my God, he is such a fucking creep. And this just, like I said, it goes on with a long conversation that slowly over the course of the episode reveals things to us. We find out, first of all, through Flora's flashbacks, that Henry was sleeping with Charlotte. She had almost walked in on them at one point. She caught them while they were getting dressed. And we know, obviously, what's going on. And that's one of those things where I don't know if Flora realized. As a child, I know I would have known what that meant. Whether I was only 5 years old or not, I would still know. But Flora, it doesn't seem like she's quite put it together. I don't know if now that she's 8 and looking back at these memories that she is, piecing things together. It doesn't seem like it, because that's not really her priority right now. She's got actual ghosts. She's being possessed. That's what she's focusing on, And then the memories that he is having are about his brother disowning him and being left here holding the bag. So he thinks, because of course nobody actually knows what happened to Peter. So his alter ego is mocking him for the fact that Peter ran off with $200,000. And he says something about how, I think he says Miles's money or Dominic's money. It's it's not his money, and he replaced it, as he says, because obviously, again, that's a feeling of guilt on his part. He's trying to make up for things. Ashleigh says Miles. Okay, yeah, that's what I kind of figured, because I didn't think that, yeah. So he's just doing what he can on his end to it's just these very paltry attempts to make recompense. And it's from the outside looking in, you're just oh, dude, come on. You have to know this isn't going to help, but what are you going to do? Not try? And eventually he has to relive the memory of finding out that they were both dead. And his alter ego not only is very eager for him to experience this again, but also claims that this memory isn't even the worst one. The worst one was calling the house and having to break the news to all of them and hearing Flora's voice and knowing that she's actually his. That's obviously weighing on him a ton. I find that particularly interesting. And this is something that, because I'm not a parent, I don't really know, I don't know how true this is or would be. And I'm certain it depends on you as a person, because people all just react very differently to the same sort of news and stimulus. But finding out that somebody is your offspring and you didn't know, he had a close relationship with these kids, obviously, before being disowned. And that, I think, probably also is a major factor, that he had all of this affection. And this adds a whole other layer to everything. But I also am just I don't know that, also, it's hard to say as a woman, too, because I would have given birth. So how would I know? Or how would I not know? But finding that out, I just can't imagine what my mental processes would be. I mean, the guilt, of course, but then wanting to tell her, but then there's the oddness of you can say, oh, hey, you actually do have a parent left. But in saying that, you have to tell them what you did, explain that, and it's only her that has a parent left. Miles would be left out of it. Miles wouldn't actually have a parent. So you're you're almost maybe driving a wedge between the two of them in a way, which I would feel particularly weird about I think that would be my biggest hang up. So yeah, his feelings of responsibility here, they seem really severe and acute. And like I said, I know it's different for everybody because there are parents who can walk away from their kids and they really manage to rationalize why that's fine. And it's like, it just doesn't seem to haunt their steps the way it's haunting his, even though he didn't even know. So by the end of this episode, like I said, he starts to get a really bad feeling about everything and suits up to go to Bly. And his alter ego keeps stepping in his way and telling him, like, you don't have to go. It's like 3 hours away. You've been drinking. And it's unclear to me how much the alter ego is, like, linked to Bly. And if it's actively attempting to keep him away. And how much of it is simply his self-destructive qualities that are trying to keep him from doing anything productive or proactive. And I think it's the latter. I had thought when I first watched the episode, I watched it twice. When I first watched it, I kind of thought that maybe it was Bly trying to keep him away. But upon a second viewing, it doesn't feel like this is a manifestation that Bly as a house or a place is responsible for. It feels entirely internal. So, yeah, it's just, I don't know if he's going to get there in time. This is episode 6, so we've got 2 more. Oh, and I should mention, this is called the Jolly Corner. I don't remember if it's explained what the Jolly Corner is. Is that supposed to be like where Flora has been tucked away in her mind? Or is that meant to be like what he is, where he's staying? Because it's where this like grinning creep is. I don't really know what the Jolly Corner is. Or is that the name of the pub that Jamie and Danny are talking about earlier? If it is, that's kind of a weird choice to name this episode, but I don't know. So, all right. With that, I will transition to Danny and Jamie. There's a pretty sweet opening scene with the two of them where Jamie's in the greenhouse, and it turns out it's like 6 o'clock in the morning, and Danny's awake and trying to be super casual about how she just happened to be awake and just happened to make up some coffee, and it becomes clear that she has come here because she feels bad about the way things were left between the two of them, and is trying to initiate a conversation. And like I said, she doesn't see the ghost at all this episode. So I really feel like that's progress. I love Jamie taking a sip of this coffee and she spits it back into the cup. Danny, girl, it isn't that hard. What exactly are you doing? You know, this is one of those things, guys. I don't know. I had this with Brendan's mother. She would ask me if I wanted tea, and I would say yes, because I love tea. And this woman, and she had clear mugs, so you could see what was happening in the cup. She would literally pour the hot water in the cup first, before the tea bag, which right there hit the brakes. I don't think so. Then she would take the tea bag, drop it in, and you know, it floats. You've got to like jam it down with a spoon if you're going to be a lunatic and put the bag in second. And she would push the bag down with her spoon until it got saturated, do the dunk twice, you know, the like tea bagging motion, twice, pull the bag out, throw it in the trash. I kid you not. The water took on a cloudiness, and that was it. That was it. That was the tea. It was the most horrifying thing I've ever seen. And I to this day don't know who hurt her or what that was about. But I never said anything to her about it because it was just the kind of thing that there was so much wrong with it that I didn't even know where to start, and I just decided to leave it. All that I would say when she was making mine was, leave the bag in, please. And honestly, I would have preferred like 3 bags, but setting that aside. So I say, how could you fuck up a cup of tea or a pot of coffee that bad? But people do. I really don't think it's hard. It shouldn't be, but there it is. I don't know. There's a bunch of comments. Each episode is named after a story or book by the same author all these stories and the overall session is based on. Oh, that's interesting. That's kind of a weird thing to do, though. Like, I understand the idea behind themed titles, and I think it's like a neat idea, but it doesn't always really work, and I don't know about this. I did not copy that they were by the same author, says Ashleigh. Reference to a book of the same name from the 1900s about a guy thinking about his past. Guy in that book also has an alter ego. Oh, I see. Ariel says, isn't that how the main lady in 50 Shades did her tea too? I don't know, but that sounds 1,000% correct because she sucked. So I bet her tea was really terrible. You're spilling the tea on the tea. It's true. Like, listen, what even is the point? Like, you're just spending money on tea bags that you're not even using. Just buy, like, unsweetened iced tea and pour a dash of it in hot water and do that. Like, anyway, I'm sorry, I'm fixating on the wrong thing, as usual. So, at this point, Danny says something about how strange it has been lately. Owen hasn't been around. Jamie hasn't been around as much. The kids have been acting really weird. And she says, I seem to see less and less of Hannah. She just goes out, I guess, by herself. Sometimes I turn around and she's just gone. And, of course, we know what's going on. I don't believe that after that last episode that Hannah remembers what's happened to her. Based on the interactions they have later this episode, it just seems like Hannah is going through a cycle of remembering that she's dead and then, like, forgetting and having to remember again. So Danny, at this point, is trying to talk to Jamie about maybe going to a pub and having a nice, boring time. And Jamie is, like, receptive to this in the way... Jamie is one of those people that I feel like, were I trying to flirt and I got the kind of vibe that Jamie puts off, I would stop flirting because I would interpret it as them not being interested. You know? It just feels like... And she does say this, and when Danny comes at her and is like, I want to fix this and do this right, and she says, every time you act like you might be sure, you have this irritating habit of jumping back like you've seen a scary bug. Which, that's the thing, is like, she's not wrong. Her irritation is completely justified. That said, when the way that she reacts, it feels like it's like more than that. It feels like she genuinely just doesn't like Danny a little bit. And I understand that that's really true to her character. Like, when you're in defensive mode, which it's obvious she is, right? Like, she has her baggage that she's dealing with in trying to even imagine starting a relationship. You're going to kind of put up barriers on purpose. So being a teeny bit hostile makes total sense. But I did sort of feel like, you know what, Danny? You're pretty brave because you keep pushing. And I wouldn't have, and I might have missed out. But the fact that you keep pushing and you're getting her to, like, open up and sort of explain to you what's going on with her, that's a pretty big step. You know, that's the kind of thing that a lot of people don't really get to that part of a relationship until after they've been seeing each other initially for a little while. Because that's sort of when people tend to realize whether or not they've got feelings. And if they've got feelings, it either turns into something real because both of you feel that way. One of you realizes the other has feelings and you don't, and so it's time to shut it down. Or you both realize you have feelings, and maybe one of you is a lot less receptive to this development than the other. But they're kind of like hitting the gas and already getting there, which makes sense because the kinds of reactions that Danny has been having are very exaggerated. But I did like this conversation. So she winds up later on in the episode. She comes back around. I'll get to what's going on with Flora, of course, but first I want to just talk about these two. She takes Danny out for a walk in the moonlight. And they go to this like little secluded spot where she has planted what's called a moonflower. I've never heard of these before. I'm assuming that they're a real thing. But they basically, these flowers like bloom overnight and immediately die. And then new flowers bloom. So it's not like they open and close. They have 1 day's worth of time and then they're gone. And they're extremely fleeting and they're really beautiful and unusual and difficult to grow in this climate, evidently. And she shows them to Danny and then sits down and tells her what her childhood was like and the way this all went down. It's really honestly awful. Basically, her parents, they were too young. Her dad worked in a coal mine and so just like killed himself to keep their family solvent. Her mother was too young for like the responsibility, wound up fucking around on him because he was gone all the time. She got pregnant and everybody in town knew that her father wasn't the father of that kid. And it just wound up becoming this like gross cycle. And her mother bailed, leaving her to try and take care of the family. Her father was still, just working himself to death. And eventually, child services stepped in and split them up into foster homes because there was nobody taking care of them. And she wound up in jail for a little while, I think she says. And she had to go to therapy sessions, which we find out later, that were like required, and she fucking hated them. But eventually she just started talking in order to shut up the woman that was assigned to her, and began to slowly realize that like she was sleeping through the night, that it had actually helped, even though at the time she thought it was all bullshit. And that's really like such a great story for how therapy works. You like, so many people will start therapy because they are being forced to by somebody. That's like a really common story, whether it be in school, in jail, in the midst of like maybe a breakup or like the threat of a breakup. A lot of people will have like couples counseling, and one of the couples one of the counselors will start to be like, maybe you guys should come separately because they realize like there's more here that we need to deal with than just your interactions as a couple. And then and a lot of people to it, not really knowing what to expect, but feeling like they just have to. And then unexpectedly, they begin to realize it is helping, even though the ways in which it helps feel hard to quantify. So when we don't have like hard data to back up the feelings of progress we're having, we tend to discount them. And I just really liked that bit where she's recommending that like they get Flora a psychologist, because what Danny wants to do is call a doctor. And Jamie seems more aware than anybody. It's likely psychological, what's going on with Flora. We know that's not exactly true. I mean, one could argue ghosts aren't real, so clearly it is. She's imagining this whole thing, and I'm sure that's what a therapist would actually say to Flora were she to try and explain to them what's going on here. But, if this were any other sort of situation, I would think that Jamie was right on the money with that. I also want to note The fact that they've waited this long to call a doctor is alarming to me. This little girl is sleepwalking and passing out cold. This is brain tumor territory here, guys. Like, we're getting into a place where something could be really, really wrong. Why have you not already, like, you need to get her into an MRI machine, like, stat, you know? But I understand that because of the nature of the show, they can't really do that yet. So, let's talk about Flora. In the midst of the conversation with Jamie, Danny looks out the window and sees Flora all by herself wandering out onto the lawn. Rushes after her, and Flora just seems sort of out of it as she's walking. They're running after her, yelling her name, and she doesn't stop. And when they grab her and turn her around, she just seems confused. When she's walking out there, it's not like her eyes are closed, you know? And to be clear, I'm pretty sure that when you sleepwalk, your eyes aren't necessarily closed. That's not always how it works. That's something that's like, you know, a really common trope is somebody walking around with their eyes closed, but that's not actually the case. That said, she just seems confused. It's like she's not quite seeing what's around her. And she turns around and says, "I don't feel very well." And then all of a sudden, her face clears, and we see Miss Jessel standing between Jamie and Danny. And she says, "I just woke up. I don't know." Then Miss Jessel touches her on the forehead. And all of a sudden, we jump to her in bed. And she has no memory of what happened. Which I really enjoy because we see later exactly what happens. She is like, it's clear Miss Jessel is taking her over and she begins speaking the way that Becca used to speak. But in this moment, we're in her perspective. So she's like being tucked away. She doesn't, and we aren't entirely sure what's going on here either. It's like pretty clear. You can make your assumptions based on the fact that she touched her and the way that had seemed to work in that fashion between like Peter and Miles, right? But it's just an interesting thing to see how like differently it looks when you're inside her head and how sudden it is and how Miss Jessel reaches out to her and she doesn't resist. You know, when she lays her finger on her forehead, there's a real sense in that moment that Flora knows what's going on and is like agreeing to it. And later on she begins to draw the line, but it seems for the moment that she's been sort of treating this whole thing like a game a little bit. So let's see. This is the ghost that appears when Danny and Mrs. Gross check up on her, by the way. Ooh. I'm clicking on it to see. Ooh. Is that like just a bag over their head? That's a weird, I can't even like quite make out what's going on there. It just looks like somebody who's got like a giant like Kangol hat yanked down over their face. So yeah, she wakes up and like we have her tucked in a memory for a while here. The first memory that she has is of this little boy ghost. And you can tell that this isn't the present because her giant dollhouse is not next to her bed. So she's like looking for the kid that she saw at the foot of her bed that hid for a second. She sees him standing in her doorway and she goes up to him and his back is to her. And when she finally taps his shoulder and he turns around, he hasn't got a face and she screams and runs to her mom. And this is when she runs into her mother and uncle both getting dressed. And she tries to show them her little visitor who isn't there. And she's very firm in being like, he was here. Don't tell me he wasn't. And her uncle tells her that he had a friend that he gave a story and that it helped. And she's deciding that she's going to come up with a story herself. And that's going to be how she decides to handle this situation. In the midst of the conversation, though, she says something about this isn't right. I'm too old. I feel like I should be littler. And her mother says, well, you should be 5 years old. You were 5 years old when this happened. So we're like, there's immediately this moment of just like, what? She's in a memory, but she's like aware she's in a memory, which is really weird. And she's asking, why is this happening? And her uncle says, well, you know why, don't you? And all of a sudden, the previous sort of affection that you felt coming off her uncle and her mother, her father and her mother, that seems to go away, and they're very stiff, and there's just a weirdness there. And I really liked that transition, that sort of feeling of like, because she's caught them at tricking her, it's not the same now, you know? So yeah, as soon as I realize it, it'll be over as soon as I wake up. And indeed, when she wakes up, she has no idea what she's been doing. And when she asks Danny what happened, Danny says that she just basically like passed out. She says, it's all right. We just want to make sure that you're okay. We were talking and just talking about the walk, and, you know, you just sort of fainted. And she does a really great job here of trying to tell you can feel the hesitation in her. She wants to tell this little girl the truth about what happened, but she doesn't want to scare her. And yet she doesn't want to, you know, lie to her about what's going on with her. And the hesitation just comes through really clear. And she tells them that she's tired and she wants to sleep and actually dream this time, not a memory. There are a couple of moments in this where she says something to Danny, and Danny just doesn't react the way that I feel like a person would react. That's the one flaw, I'll say, in this show. And this happens a lot in these kinds of stories where there's like a weird supernatural mystery, is somebody will say something that like any ordinary person would be like, what do you mean by that? But she doesn't ask that question. You know, earlier when she's like, you're not letting Peter in the house, are you? And Flora says, no, that's not how it works. Anybody would be like, then how does it work? Because that wording sends off a million alarm bells. And yet Danny doesn't pressure her to keep talking about it. And it just doesn't feel totally real to me, you know? It's just the kind of thing like, even if you didn't suspect there was something supernatural going on, which is unclear whether Danny has that on her radar at all at this point. I feel like she does, but again, not totally sure. But even if you didn't, you'd want to know what the kid meant. You know, what is it going on in their head? So, okay, then we have the scene with Hannah and Danny. And I'm looking at it in the screen right now. God, yeah. That ghost over in the corner, Ashleigh, that you gave me the screenshot to, it's like practically invisible. There's no way I would see that at all. Even if I were watching it in a dark room, I don't think I would have noticed that. And this is when we really see the first instance of Danny getting genuinely angry. Like, she's talking to Hannah about Henry. And how could anybody just ignore these kids, basically? And Hannah says, pretty gently, he hasn't been himself. It's like none of them came back. And it just feels really sad. You can see that Danny wants so badly to do right by this little girl, and she feels really way in over her head. So she comes in and she gives Flora a little like tuck in and a little kiss on the head. And she turns around to leave, and we see the child playing with the dollhouse. And she senses something and turns. And when she turns, the child is no longer there. And it's a really great moment. I love this, like, feeling that she has that something's going on, and the way that she turns around, because it makes your hair stand on end. I feel like we've all had moments like that where we're like, something's there. And there's not. But, like, there clearly was. Something's not okay, you know? Oh my God. And I wanted to mention too, you guys, I know that a lot of you are patrons. And over the weekend, Rashawn and I covered the movie Ghost. And they're talking about going to see Ghost. Owen says something about, come on, it's Patrick Swayze. And I think it's supposed to be like 1990 at this point. I think they're talking about Ghost. And I love the fact that they're talking about going to see Ghost with an actual ghost in the room. It's just really goofy. So, oh wait, no, he says, yeah, in concert. Wait, what? Maybe it wasn't Ghost. Either way. So, this is the scene with Jamie and Danny. I've pretty much been over that. Then we have another moment with Flora. And first we get to see a memory from Henry's perspective of him bringing the dollhouse to Flora's birthday, even though he can't stay for the party. And this is the moment where it seems his brother figures out that there's an affair happening based on a weirdness. He gets a little bit too close to Charlotte and puts his hand over hers, and she says, not here. And when they look up, her husband was standing there, and he's watching them. And I'm really wondering if there was any indication before that, or if it's 100% just due to him spotting this moment between them that leads to them sort of, you know, tipping him off that that's what was going on. I get the sense it was just this and her saying not here. I feel like maybe if she hadn't said not here, they might have been able to get away with it. He might not have started to piece it together. But because of the way she decided to, like, say those words out loud, implying, not here, but somewhere else will be fine, that, I think, is sort of what sealed it. And we have the eventual conversation between her and her husband later on in the day, where he puts the math together and begins to realize that, like, the baby had supposedly been premature, but she wasn't actually small. And that his wife had to lie about the timeline of her pregnancy in order to make it so that the conception occurred while he was still at home. And it's a terrible scene, and the acting is so excellent. There's just, like, from him, there's obviously this profound anger, but it's not violent. He doesn't yell at her. He doesn't throw things. It's just this, like, humiliated sadness that sort of overwhelms the anger and just makes it really tragic. This moment, you know, especially when he asks her, do you love him? And she just puts her hands over her mouth. And and the fact that he says, I have been gone a lot, haven't I? And the way that she nods. It's so, like, guys, her acting in this scene, it's really good. As somebody who has been in this position in my way, you don't want to hurt the other person, but it's too late. You've done it. And you'd been sort of rationalizing that what you were doing wasn't hurting them, even though it definitely was. And yet there is a sense of, like, but I'm also, like, a person and I needed someone, you know? And, and the fact that he at all tries to sympathize by being like, I was gone an awful lot. You know, there's just, he's giving her some compassion in a moment when I'm certain she does not feel that she deserves it. And that almost makes it worse to realize that, like, have I been cheating on somebody who is actually a great person? And have I, like, ruined something with a person who has this kind of capacity? Which that specifically I relate to a lot. Brendan was a genuinely good person. He was just a really bad husband. And it was a long time before I could distinguish between those two things, because I always sort of thought that I was super lucky to be married to somebody who was such a good person. And I would use that to discount my experience of feeling abandoned in the relationship. And it took a long time for me to get the, like, vocabulary to be able to say, okay, he is a good person who does care about people and he has a lot of empathy, but he is not a good partner and he doesn't consider me and he doesn't seem to think of this as something that needs his attention as much as his job. So then we have the moment where Danny wakes up in the middle of the night and her and Jamie had hooked up. I am assuming this is the first time that she's been with a woman. It's pretty significant. She wakes up and she sees a scar on Jamie's shoulder. And I don't know if this is going to be significant at all. We know that Jamie has, like, you know, been through some shit. So if maybe it's meant to just be like sort of a signal of what she's gone through. But it's pretty quickly overshadowed by the fact that Flora is once again outside. It's like the crack of dawn. And again, she gets sort of taken over by Miss Jessel, and it's a really weird moment. She is sent away inside her own mind, and when she eventually wakes up from this memory of her mother showing her the talismans that she has made, she goes downstairs to find everybody eating dinner without her, and she genuinely doesn't remember how earlier in the night she ate dinner in her room, because she wasn't in her body at that point. Miss Jessel was there. And this moment where she's, like, sitting with her mother and telling her, I miss you. Ugh, it's so sad, you guys. So this all continues to escalate. There is an awful scene that I hate so much. Miss Jessel is sitting on her bed and she's talking to her. Well, first she gives that little boy a story. I forgot about this. The little boy thing, this ghost boy, is just the worst, you guys. He's a little faceless boy who goes running downstairs, and she winds up, like, finding a piece of a face from a doll to put on him. And it's like, oh, that's much better. No, it's not. It is not better. It is worse. It is much, much worse. No. Do you hear me? Anyway. So again, she realizes that this is an old memory. This moment that she did this was when she was 5 years old. So when she wakes up, she starts sort of yelling at Miss Jessel and being like, I don't know what's going on here, but I'm tired of acting strange, not being able to remember things. Miles is acting weird too. And she says, what's wrong with Miles? And she's like, he's fine when he's Miles, but he's not. And Miss Jessel disappears when she says this. And she yells, you can't keep doing that. Come back where I can see you. And Miss Jessel indeed appears, like, on command. It's like she has to listen to her, or maybe just wants to. I don't know. And she has an expression on her face of real sadness. Like, she feels bad for what she's putting Flora through, but feels like she doesn't really have a choice. I don't know. But at this moment, Danny walks in and she sees Miss Jessel sitting on the bed, and her scared acting in this moment is on point. I don't know if she knows Miss Jessel on sight. I think that she saw the photo, right? So I think that she must know. She comes out into the hallway and she yells for Miles, and Peter Quinn is standing there. He says, "This is awkward." And as he's saying that, we see Miss Jessel behind Danny putting her hand on her shoulder, clearly taking her over. So Flora goes sprinting off, and of course Danny follows her up into the deserted wing of the house, or the attic, or I don't even know where they are. And creepy fucking Flora is just standing in the middle of the room and says, "I'm sorry." And we see Miles come up behind Danny with like a candlestick and whack her in the head. And then credits. And it feels like in the afterlife, Miss Jessel and Peter have like teamed up. But the way that she reacted to what Danny, or to what Flora was saying, Miss Jessel seemed to not know what was going on with Miles. So now I'm like, are they at odds? But why? This seemed like an orchestrated attack, though. So I don't understand. I don't know. But I'm over time, so I have to wrap it up. So we've only got, 2 more episodes? 3 more. There's 3 more. Okay. I keep thinking that there's 10 this season, because that's how Netflix tends to go. Well, the next episode won't be for 2 weeks, so I am going to be on tenterhooks until then, but I've been really enjoying this show. It's been sort of an unexpected pleasure. I wasn't really sure whether I was going to like it or not, and it's actually turned out really well. It's been a nice surprise. So, anyway, okay. Thank you again so much, Ashleigh, and until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.